RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOps AF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the RevOps AF podcast, where we talk to people who are RevOps AF about things that are RevOps AF. I'm your host, Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, and we also have RevOps AF, the conference, which will be held in New Orleans in May of 2025 and Berlin, Germany in June of 2025 for all of our folks who are outside of the US. But that is not what we are here to talk about today. I'm here with Shantanu Mishra, who is a former SVP of Revenue Operations, a VP of Revenue Operations many times over at a variety of B2B SaaS companies. And so we are going to be talking all about the role of revenue operations and what that should look like in B2B SaaS. Whether that is what things typically look like is probably another question, but we're going to be talking about what it should look like. So Shantanu, thank you for being here, my friend.
Absolutely, Matt. Thanks for having me here. I have been following your podcast series. I find them really useful, get to not only hear from my peers in the industry, I think there's a lot that I get to learn as well. So thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you being here to drop some knowledge. And so let's dive into the first question that I have for you. So RevOps as a function, actually, I should look this up of like when it first started even being, mentioned, or the first sort of job titles on LinkedIn. But we started our community, RevOps Co-op, about a little over 4 years ago. We had 0 members at that point. Now we have close to 15,000 members. So things have certainly grown a lot. And while we've made certainly plenty of improvements in the role and everything has evolved, there's still a lot of inconsistency. So first, before we dive into the role of RevOps in B2B SaaS and what it should look like and how we get there, let's first talk about your definition of RevOps. So how do you define revenue operations, the role, since you've now seen it and you've led these teams at a variety of different companies?
Yeah. And Matt, I think even when you asked me the question, you were like, what's your definition of revenue operations? Yeah. I think if you were talking to a CFO or a CMO, you wouldn't say, what's your definition? Because those functions have been long enough, they are standardized, and the definition across the industry is pretty standard, right? So exactly as you said, I will provide my perspective on what revenue operations is, and would love to hear from my peers because I'm sure they have similar and definitions which might be slightly different from mine. So one, I think revenue operations, it's art and it's science, right? And through this art and science, what revenue operations is supposed to deliver is consistent, scalable growth. At B2B SaaS companies, it's definitely very relevant, but it's becoming relevant across different verticals. And to achieve that growth, that profitable growth, what has to be done is there are 2 funnels that need to be managed. One is the traditional funnel, which we have always known, which goes from lead to win. So marketing generates leads, goes to BDRs, comes to sales, they go through the stages, and then they close it. But there's a second funnel, which has becoming more and more relevant, is on the customer success side, where once the customer has said, yes, we want to buy your product, there has to be a successful onboarding, there has to be value realization, and then how do we continue to grow with the customer and renew? And in fact, when you take the 2 funnels and from vertically, if you put them horizontally together, it becomes like a bow tie. So instead of managing 2 funnels, I like to say is that revenue operations is supposed to manage that entire bow tie. So if you think of it, lead generation, the velocity at which the leads and the opportunities they flow through the system. What is the conversion rate? What is the win rate? What kind of segments are we winning and losing, right? So understanding that entire left side of the bow tie. Similarly, on the right-hand side, how do we make sure that there is successful onboarding so that the hundreds and thousands of licenses that the customers might have bought, they quickly get redeemed? Then how do you take customer onto a journey where they are able to realize the full value of the product? And then build deeper relationships with the customer by growing the license base and continuing to renew. And as to do that, there's strategy, and strategy involves multiple aspects. There's analytics, data, There's operations that needs to be managed across sales and customer success. There are tools, processes, enablement, deal desk. So all of these different functions are needed that to manage this entire bow tie end to end. And if done correctly, it can lead to tremendous results, which I have seen being implemented at multiple companies. And that sets up any company for long-term sustained success.
Yeah. And so you brought up the art and the science piece, some of the different elements of what RevOps should be. And you also touched on a little bit on your experience, right? So you've had sales operations roles before, you've had revenue operations roles before, you've been a VP of sales strategy and operations, you've been a VP of strategy and transformation, you've done digital transformation, you've done the SVP of revenue strategy and operations. So in your experience, right, in those roles, which have been at some very large SaaS companies of 2,000 people plus, right? What have your teams looked like? Like, how have they been structured? How have you actually executed or activated your definition, your ideal definition of revenue operations?
And at each company, I have seen the teams structured differently, which I think is because of the evolution, the changes that RevOps and the SaaS industry in general is going through. So at the starting, when I started my journey with any of these companies, the initial structure was different. And in almost all the cases, what I saw was that slowly and surely, they were all moving towards a similar standardized structure, right? So what I see is there's always a centralized GTM strategy team. There's a centralized data analytics KPIs team, right? There's tools, processes, deal desk, enablement. So these are the functions that support sales, support some functions of marketing, support BDRs, customer success, professional services channel as well. And then there are some verticals which are specific to sales, like sales operations. For example, the territory design, the forecasting, etc., that needs to be done within the sales operations. The customer success operations, the workflow management, that needs to be done. How do you ensure that all the renewals, they are being touched upon and they are being worked upon at a regular frequency? So there are some horizontal functions that go across everything. And then there are some vertical functions which are very specifically aligned to either partner sales, direct sales, customer success, sometimes supporting BDRs as well.
Yeah. And all those roles, or I guess those teams that you mentioned, those all sit and exist within a centralized core revenue operations team or function, or do those folks and people exist within each particular department?
Not always. And especially when you're leading revenue operations, one of the things that I work under that guidance or assumption is that not everyone might be reporting into, let's say, if I'm the SVP, not everyone, all of those functions might be reporting into me, right? But the org design doesn't necessarily define revenue operations. Revenue operations might exist, some functions of revenue operations might exist outside the reporting structure, right? So sometimes deal desk is outside the reporting structure. Sometimes enablement is outside the reporting structure. And that's okay. Reporting structure is one thing, and how that team operates, what's the operating rhythm within that team and how they function and collaborate with each other is a different thing. If the reporting structure is that set up that way, that has its advantages, but it should not be the limiting factor from seeing that all of those functions as part of revenue operations and then them being able to collaborate to deliver success.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in your experience and opinion, the being able to drive alignment across those individuals and teams does not require, call it a centralized kind of group, or like you said, everyone to report up into the same leader or the same department, meaning you can drive alignment and accomplish the things you need to accomplish if those folks exist or maybe report up to other folks. Is that right?
Definitely. And that's where the role of a leader, the revenue operations leader, becomes very critical. That, let's say, compensation design is within finance, which happens quite a few times, right? There are some marketing analytics which might reside within marketing. So how does the revenue operations leader collaborate and partner with the CFO and the CMO to make sure that we understand that the reporting structure is one thing, but the way this team needs to deliver has to be beyond the reporting structure?
That makes sense. And I think that's interesting. We've been on the road doing some of these executive think tank discussions in a variety of cities like San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and we've been getting about 20-25 RevOps leaders together and talking about some of the same sort of questions. And actually what's interesting is a lot of people have different opinions on this question of where kind of RevOps, what function should report up into kind of RevOps and what should that look like. There's actually a lot of agreement on the things that RevOps should be responsible for, which is a lot of what you just mentioned, but then actually like driving that alignment and like where RevOps should report to and all the things that RevOps should actually own. There's been a lot of different opinions on that in terms of like reporting up to the CEO, the CRO, the CFO. Some people say it doesn't really matter as long as you have like the company culture and a leader who understands like revenue operations and is able to drive some of the alignment. So it's interesting that you brought up that point, and I'm guessing probably can vary company to company just depending on the company culture as well.
Definitely. I have been part of different org designs. I've reported directly into the CRO. I've reported in the CFO. I've reported into Chief Operations Officer, right? So all the three flavors have existed. I've also seen where sometimes the revenue operations reports directly into the CEO because they have to collaborate across Chief Sales Officer, Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Customer Officer, CFO, CIO, etc. So all of these flavors do exist. Directly reporting into CRO is possibly the most common structure, which has its pros and multiple advantages. And as long as there's a relationship and an understanding between the revenue operations leader and the CRO that, yes, there's a reporting structure, but the revenue operations leader will also act as an early warning system, will also act as that function which is responsible for identifying what's not working and be that truth teller in the system. If that can function really well, then reporting into the CRO does work very well.
Yeah, that makes sense as well. And so you talked about this at the beginning as it relates to B2B SaaS, where you have all the stuff that is traditional or maybe that we're used to with like marketing, driving demand and leads and handing those off to sales, and then sales works those leads and converts them into opportunities and customers. But then SaaS is unique in that once you have customers, you need to keep those customers around. You need to drive expansion, revenue from them as well. That involves marketing to your existing customers. That involves maybe your customer success team identifying where there might be expansion opportunities, handing things off to your sales team. And so there's a lot of moving parts overlap between various teams and various functions. You've worked in kind of software and technology now for a while. And so what is that as it relates to RevOps fitting nicely into that B2B SaaS model that we just described, right? Where you have this bow tie. How, I don't know, like, has it for you, maybe in your experience, has it always been this like bow tie model, or what were things like pre-bow tie? Like when it was just maybe the flip the bow tie, get rid of that bottom part, and it was just like a normal funnel. And then, like you said, how has that evolution been?
Definitely. And I think the way my career has grown, I think it has been in parallel it has lots of parallels with how revenue operations has grown. When I started my career 18, 19 years back post MBA, I started working at Dell, and I did a variety of functions which were not called sales operations at that time. But now when I look back, I was like, oh, this was the classical sales operations function that we were doing. But at that time, when I was carrying out those functions, they were under different umbrellas and by different names.
Yeah.
But now they are.
Do you remember what they were called? What were some of were they just like business operations or just
operations or doing analytics, doing reporting, right? But there was not a centralized sales operations. Even if the names were the same as today, they were not necessarily reporting into the sales operations function. They were reporting under different teams. So sometimes the names were different, sometimes the names were same, but it was not always centralized under sales operations is what I was saying. I saw that from that point, how things started getting centralized under sales operations. So like 10 years back, sales operations became a very common name, right? Industry-wide accepted nomenclature and function. And then as SaaS started growing, we started realizing that, okay, our journey doesn't end when the customer signs a contract. Actually, then there's onboarding, which in case of software is a lot more complicated than just selling a piece of hardware. So that onboarding function, making sure that the hundreds of licenses and hundreds of users at the customer, they understand how to use all the features of the software for their particular use case. So license reduction. And then how do you make sure the customer success team, how do they make sure that the customer is able to realize the value? So this customer success function is also relatively new because earlier it was sales and then customer support, which was something is not working and I need help. That was customer support. The gap between selling the deal and customer support is where customer success comes in. That we are going to be with the customers throughout the journey to help them realize the full value of the product. And as customer success started coming in, that's when it became from a single funnel to a bow tie. We started using the term revenue operations rather than just sales operations. And the latest, some of the newer things which are getting added to this revenue operations function are how do we partner and work with marketing, right? Start looking at lead generation, the velocity at which the leads are going, the lead conversion that's coming in. What should be the role of marketing versus sales versus BDRs in up market versus down market, in land versus expand. So defining that entire revenue engine between marketing, BDR, sales, and even customer success. Who plays what role depending upon the customer size and whether it's a land motion or an expand motion. So that's the entire journey that we have gone through, and I'm sure there's more to come as we continue to evolve.
Yeah. And like you said, you've been there, been pre-sales ops, you've been through sales ops, and now this evolution to RevOps, and kind of understand again back to the theme of our chat of like the role that RevOps should play in B2B SaaS. So what's one maybe common challenge for folks out there who might be listening, who are maybe going through this transition themselves, where they've been at maybe a larger established company who's maybe in process or is trying to move from this more kind of traditional functional specific ops model within each particular team to now a centralized kind of revenue operations model? What's one thing that folks might, be getting in the way, or like one piece of advice that you've give people going through that journey?
The common thing that I see is that just because this has been evolving at such a rapid rate, the lack of standardization, right? You talk to different revenue operations leader, and very simple example. What are the 5 KPIs that you measure? You will get slightly different answers. There are some common ones, but there will be some slightly different answers. What's the org structure? What's the function of revenue?
Yeah.
The answers to these questions, you will get different answers, not only from the revenue operations leaders, but also from the functions that we work with, the CIO, the CHRO, CMO. What is the role of revenue operations, right? And therefore, what happens is that I'm a revenue operations leader in one company. We have settled on a certain definition and a certain operating model. When the revenue operations leader like myself goes into a new company, the operating model and other things will be a lot more, could be very drastically different, right? Think of a CFO going from one company to next company. Things are going to be different, but not very different, because there's a great degree of standardization, and that function has been evolving and it has stabilized and it has been in stable state for some time now. But revenue operations, because of that, every time you go into a new company, it could be slightly different, or in some cases, very different. And therefore, one piece of advice is that, yes, it's good to have my definition, our definition of what revenue operations is. But when we step into a new role, a new opportunity, let's use that opportunity to understand how does revenue operations fit into the culture, the operating model, and the way this new company. So going with that understanding, going with open eyes and ears, and then adjusting according to the function is very critical.
Yeah, it's a journey, like you said, to get there. And I think the main thing that I heard you talk about before was, again, when it comes to things like org structure and stuff like that, is that, you can successfully accomplish the things that you want to accomplish with dotted lines instead of solid lines in terms of reporting structures. So I think that's the other piece for people to keep in mind is like, one, know that you are going through this journey, right? If you're stepping into a new role, or if you've been at the company for a while and they're going through this transition, it won't happen overnight. It probably won't happen as quick as you want it to, but know that you've got to take steps towards getting there. And that does not mean just leapfrogging and immediately somehow landing there, right? Like tomorrow. I think that's step one. And then step two is look at the things that you want to accomplish and figure out how you can accomplish them. And maybe that means not call it like fighting for some of the things that you think you might need, right? It's easy to default to think that, like, oh, well, if I want to be able to drive this alignment or accomplish the things that I want to within my revenue operations team at this company, then I need direct ownership and oversight over X, Y, and Z, right? And so maybe you start to like go and fight for those, right? Be like, no, marketing should not have a dedicated ops person that reports to the CMO, or like sales should not have a dedicated ops person that reports up to the VP of sales, right? You may try to fight for those things and it may take a long time. And then there's politics and there's all this back and forth, right? You might be able to save yourself a lot of headache by just eliminating that altogether and instead driving the alignment and accomplishing things that you want to, maybe without needing to have the direct line. Like I said, maybe you have a dotted line. Accomplish that through recurring weekly or weekly team meetings, and start to incorporate some of the like the sales ops folks and some of the marketing ops stuff that you're doing, right? To like help drive the collaboration. So again, like maybe just make sure that you're being intentional about the things that you're fighting for and striving for, and don't just take things for granted in terms of what you need to do to go from where you are today to that point where you want to get to.
Exactly. Since this RevOps template has not yet been standardized, let's not try to implement the same template everywhere. It will be slightly different, but just because every company has grown up in a different way and the way they see revenue operations is different. And then in due course of time, wait for the right timing and the right opportunity to keep steering things in the direction that you think works best.
Yeah, RevOps is like, it's messy, right? Like you're constantly faced with tons of things you've never experienced before, and now you've got to go out and figure out how to do them. This is just one more of those things, right? That every kind of revenue operator is faced with. All right, I have, I guess, two more questions for you, Shantanu, they're not RevOps or work related, and I didn't tell you about these beforehand, so I know I'm putting you on the spot. So the first question is, when the workday is done and you close the laptop, you're out of the systems, the KPIs, the strategy, the analytics, the data stuff, not doing RevOps stuff anymore. What are the things that you're passionate about? What do you do after work when you close the laptop?
A few different things, and you'll find a common theme. I think one, I love learning about new stuff, and then be it my team or be it my kids, being able to help them understand stuff, right? So learn, simplify, and how can we simplify it so that it's very easy for other people to understand. So after I shut down my laptop, I have two boys, 12 and 9, my wife, Olga. So it's a typical small family, suburban lifestyle that we have. So I go out with my boys, we play something. I play lots of sports, so I try to teach them, okay, let's try this and let's try this, or be it their studies, right? They're trying to understand history or what happened, right? So the textbook teaches history, but then what's the context? Why did it happen? Or trying to understand math or science. So trying to pass on the knowledge, experience that I have gained so that learning becomes fun for them, right? Learning shouldn't be, hey, I have to read the book and I have to read my slides and I have to take a test. It shouldn't be that. It should be fun. So I try to make it fun for them, both in the sports field as well as the curriculum that they have to go through. And personally, also, I'm lucky to be blessed with a good set of friends. So lots of racket sports that I play, tennis, pickleball. I've started playing a little bit, but I'm resisting pickleball because I started with tennis and I'm like, I want to stick to tennis.
Yeah.
Pickleball is fun as well. And then there's a sport that is very popular in Asia, badminton. So there are some new courts that have come up in Austin, and I have a group of friends. We go out and play there as well. Just being out there, playing sports, competing, that's what I do.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, anything with a racket, yes, Shantanu will challenge you to. So
I'll try. Yeah, I think I have decent hand-eye coordination and speed to to
Yeah.
not embarrass myself for too much.
Hey, if you don't use it, you lose it. All right. And then second question, I mentioned at the top of the podcast our conference that we're doing RevOps AF. So like I said, it'll be in New Orleans in May 2025. We'll have 300 to 350 folks that are there. So I want you to pretend that you are a speaker at RevOps AF. You're on the main stage. We've got 350 people in the audience. We call your name. Everyone is screaming, going nuts. They're super excited about your chat. You're walking up onto the stage. What song would you play? What would your walk-on song be as you entered stage left to the RevOps AF stage?
Uh, so again, when it comes to songs, one, I'm not a lot into music. I'm just not that artistic and creativity side of things is not very good. But it's not that I don't know too many songs. But I've been exposed to some English songs, some Hindi songs. Have
Yeah.
grown up in India. But one of the things I always miss, and this has nothing to do with business or RevOps or anything, I'm still in touch with all my friends that I grew up with, and just trying to, whenever I get with my friends, and these days it's very easy to be in touch with your friends, even though they are spread all over the world, to talk about our school days and college days. I miss
Yeah.
those, love those memories, and recount those incidents all the time. So I think it will be summer of '69, even though not saying that I was born in '69, I was born,
Uh-huh.
but summer of '69, it just talks about the experiences of growing up and all the things which, no matter what your age group is, we have all gone through similar experiences. So,
I love that. That's a good choice as well. And I've asked this question of other people, and I've heard like some people have brought up some actual like The Sound of Music. They're like, I'm a musical person, right? So like that's what they want. I'm like, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. So I support Summer of '69. I support Sound of Music. Whatever folks want to play to get them pumped up as they walk on stage is good for me. So Shantanu, thank you for dropping some knowledge on all things RevOps and what that should look like in a B2B SaaS company. Thank you for sharing your walk-on song as well and the things that kind of get you excited outside of work. I really appreciate it, my friend. With that, though, that's all I've got for you. So I will let you run. And to everyone out there who tuned in, thank you very much. I'll see you all on the flip side next time. Keep it RevOps AF.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.